Hello and welcome to the 10th Act for Share discussion group. Our topic for today is, can we change the world? It often seems that the world changes without any help from us. We just have to live with the consequences. It's been said that if you're not a revolutionary when you're young, you have no heart. But if you're not a conservative when you're old, you have no brain. Do young and old have different roles to play in changing the world? Are the young clearer-sighted, more optimistic and less realistic than their elders? And how about the cynicism of the older generation, who often seem to want to change the world, but to change it backwards and return to an imagined, idyllic golden era? Many of the changes happening at present, globally and politically, are rather worrying. How should we approach these changes, and how can we best effect the changes we wish to see? Let's see what our group of seniors have to say. In order of appearance, we'll hear from Chris, Dom, Donald, Val, Tracy and Pete.
In particular with reference to volunteering and the EU active citizen approach. I certainly think that in the light of the Greek new elections, that there is a possibility that people are feeling quite strongly about. There is a possibility of changing the world from its current situation.
If you're talking about changing the world, that's the job of young people, it seems to me. It's the young that really have got the kind of energy and the sort of spirit and also the optimism and the lack of a sense of impossibility that you could change the world.
I suppose my primary experience in this came from campaigns within Waterloo itself on big planning issues, projects of 50 million upwards, where local residents did not agree with the directions given from above, if you like, by government, either through the planning process or else through Parliament. And where the main achievement, I think, was to impress upon those who are supposed to be decision makers and so on at the top of society that they must take account and accept the opinion of the ordinary people down below, supposedly, who quite often are much better informed than they are and equally capable of making decisions of this on major events.
I agree with that. I think the experiences that started me off were back in '68, when there were a lot of mass actions, but also the rise of the concept that young people could take power and contest what the establishment was doing. And from my perspective, I think what has happened, certainly from '68 through till the '80s, was that there were agents of change, not only to trade unions, but also the whole concept of self-management was something that started and overcame the old, tired political parties, so that, for example, the homeless started mass squatting campaigns. There were movements by black people for black liberation. There was the rise of women's liberation. There was the rise of gay liberation. And there has been a whole history of self-organisation. And it took many, many forms.
I think that what I'm hearing from both of you, though, is that with the Waterloo Community Project and the activism in the 60s and 70s, was that the impetus and the momentum came from the people. It was not prescribed as, this is the age of the active citizen and this is how active citizens should be. And this is what my concerns are, that I feel very uncomfortable about a government deciding that we are going to be active citizens. We are all capable of deciding that we're active citizens. And once they decide that you're going to be active citizens, then they're going to tell you what agenda you're to be active about, which is not necessarily the agenda that we want to be active about.
I think in Britain, one of the things that was very sad about the rise of Thatcherism was where she decided that she would stamp out all dissent. However, whenever there has been a big rise of opposition, there then tends to be a counter-revolutionary response, which seems to have suppressed dissent for a number of years, but it always comes back up again because the inequalities are still there, youthful disquiet is still there.
Or people, as in UKIP, for example, rising up I think that's possibly to do with, sadly, immigration, and I think maybe it's to do with communities all living amongst themselves.
And these things often take several generations. I mean, if you think about nuclear disarmament movement, for example, it started in the 50s and 60s, and then there was the second wave, which I was a part of in the 80s, against Pershing and Cruise and SS-20s and all that. It had a big impact, but it ultimately so far didn't change everything. But it's coming back again now with the decision to whether or not to renew Trident, and also just the fact that the whole thing has changed, and actually nuclear threats isn't the main threat to personal security anymore. It's small terrorist cells.
Would it be great to kind of change that ideology that exists at the minute to do with the Islamic State, which is spreading absolutely everywhere?
And what happened to that, the big society?
That became the active citizen.
Yes, but it was a classic example of Cameron saying things from the top, which didn't actually ever take root, because it has to be driven by people's needs and by people's passion.
It's got to come from the grassroots, basically, or it's never going to work.
Across the whole world, there was the global social forums rising up in the end of the 1990s, and I think, despite all of the oppression that people have had, and since the crisis in 2008, it's taken a long time for people to be able to contest what's going on, but it's risen up, and that, for me, I think the rise of, say, internet operations and Avaz and Change.org and 38 Degrees has been an important phenomenon.
I think it was you said, Chris, about the intergenerational stuff, it was really, really good in the 80s when I was going in, because there were all those people there who had been through it in the 60s, and some of the names you'll know, like Peggy Duff and Edward Thompson and Bruce Kent and so on, who were absolutely inspiring in doing all that and giving us ideas, but also allowing us the freedom to come up with new ideas and drive it forward. And we do need, I suppose, now that we're the older ones, we do need to find ways to try and do that and inspire the younger generation. It's going to be very much driven by social media and some of the things that you've mentioned, like 38 Degrees and all these campaigning online things.
I think actually there's another point here, and that is that the present economic crisis has, as you say, gone on for 6 years. And people across Europe in particular are getting very fed up with no change. And they see the rich getting richer and the poor getting poorer, and they see things deteriorating rather than improving. And it's that which brings them together, both in terms of age, young and old, and also brings them up to thinking in terms of we need more power, we want the power. It's been taken away from us. We are being suppressed by economic policies which are deliberately aimed at preserving money rather than people, and they are not prepared to tolerate it. And of course it's a very sharp change from what happened in the late 90s, when paradoxically during a period of Thatcherism the civil servants developed policies of empowerment, and they became necessary for any organisation which wanted to promote a particular scheme in the public realm to secure the agreement and the active participation of local people within it if they were going to get funding. And that's certainly what happened in Waterloo on a number of important particular projects. Now, of course, it's the other way. There's no money for people who want to object. There's plenty of money for people who want to roll over them. And the whole thing is cumulatively leading to the kind of rejection and revolution, I hope, that we're seeing now.
They sort of had this idea that you could sort of change Britain, for instance. And here, really, I suppose I'm thinking about UKIP and people like that. That they want to they thought things were better before, so they want to kind of go back. As you get old, you sort of realise that the world changes of its own accord anyway.
The level of dissatisfaction is palpably here, but it's which way it goes. Will it go in the progressive direction towards the Greens in the elections and so on? Or is it going to... as very frighteningly seems to be the case in France, will it tip to the right and go to the front? In France, the National Front is likely to draw the dissatisfied voters, and it's equally anti the current establishment.
Yeah. I think that's the problem. You can change the world, but it's quite hard to change the world backwards. So I sort of think you've got to keep changing it, but the change has to be change moving forward. You know, it has to go forward, and in a way, it's not much use looking back nostalgically, because you're never going to get that back again. You're never going to get the 1950s back.
I think you just have to persevere until it's gone through. But it can take several generations, but it is possible. But you can't do it on your own. You need to get mass movements from the grassroots until they make it impossible for governments not to respond, basically.
There was a great quote by some philosopher who said, and historian, that if you look at the rise of fascism, it nearly always came on the back of failed revolution. And I think, therefore, we have a need to support across Europe the anti-neoliberalism and pro-popular democracy, both for whether we can win, but the terrible consequences of if there isn't such a victory, of how that will then play out in the next few years.
I think, therefore, it's time for all of us around this table to get tweeting and Facebooking and find our younger counterpoint out there and said, we're here, we're with you, let's go.